Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you are well on this fine night. I am your host, Renegade Operative, and I am here to talk to you about Paris Games Week 2017. We recently watched the press conference a few hours ago, and I wanted to give my take and give a formal review on everything I thought on the show floor. The first thing is the important keynote here, and that is Ghost of Tsushima. Now, keep in mind, this was the first thing that Sony opened up with. Let me check to see if I'm right. Yes, I think it was. The pre-show does not count. It's a weird name to pronounce, Ghost of Tsushima. I'm just going to say Ghost of Sushi. But this was the first in the keynote, and this takes place in feudal Japan. It's a classified open world action stealth adventure title, which is interesting. It's a big amalgamation and is delved into the lore of feudal Japan about this issue that happened with Tsushima, this invasion. I think they mentioned that they're taking inspiration to the point where the Mongol army invaded the island of Tsushima. So there was a lot of invasions, a lot of settlers there, and that's where they're taking inspiration. This is the long-awaited title, the long-awaited IP from Sucker Punch Productions. And if you don't know who they are the guys who helmed the Infamous series and Sly Cooper. In the process of creating this game, it took them 3.5 years to do. So all the trailer for Ghost of Sushi was rendered in game, which is pretty incredible. It gives me Neo vibes, so to speak, but they said everything is going to be open world, so that's going to be a little bit different because Neo was not an open world game. It was very, very wide, but it wasn't open world, so I'm curious what they will do with that. As a player of the Infamous series, I will say that the powers really gave you a lot of coverage, a lot of leeway to do with whatever you want with it, which is destruction. They had a morality system. That was pretty interesting stuff. While this game won't be akin to the power fantasy superhero scenario that Infamous had, I'm pretty sure all the assets behind Ghost of Sushi will be incredible, considering that the powers for Infamous, it really was interesting and fun. So them taking this concept of the life of a samurai and rolling with it is probably going to entail the same concepts, being pure fun to go wherever you want and have fun slicing people up, hopefully. Now, this is the point where my brain tuned out of the event. More indies, more PlayStation VR. The former, which I really am 50-50 about, because if they don't show any indie games that appeal to me, then I'm going to turn that light bulb off. I really don't care about anything related to PlayStation VR. It's been the same old format. Indies, PlayStation VR, hogging up the event time and time again, and it's just played out. So I'm going to be honest, all this PlayStation VR nonsense and all this indie crap, I'm really gonna say it might affect the score here, because overall sizzle reels are not how you make a presentation the greatest, unless of course you're doing something completely different like full-on gameplay presentations. Then you might capture my eye, but I'm going to judge this fairly and accordingly, and I think it's going to affect the score. There were a few things that stood out, namely Concrete Genie looked interesting art-wise. It's about a bullied teen who has a magical paintbrush or something, and he can create living landscapes in the background environment of the city. That looked pretty cool. Next we have Hong Kong Massacre, and I don't know how to quite describe this game. I guess if I were to put it in these eccentric layman's terms, it would be what happens when you take Max Payne, John Woo presents Stranglehold, and Hotline Miami and make them have a massive three-way orgy. They fuck and they churn out this giant baby that is the Hong Kong Massacre, which is interesting. That really stood out to me. I loved Hotline Miami, at least. I played that game on PlayStation Plus on PS3, and I thought it was really challenging, really fun. one-hit kill, top-down city with the guns and everything. You have to really strategize properly, and them doing a game in this vein alongside the whole bullet time, max pay mechanic has a tendency to create some possible Hong Kong style heroic bloodshed moments in a video game. I think the last video game that I played that centered around a Hong Kong style was Sleeping Dogs. So I cannot wait to see how this unfolds. Hopefully they have all the flash and substance for Hong Kong Massacre, and hopefully this game is a worthwhile shooter. I mean, hopefully this game is not as disappointing as something like Hatred. That game was completely abysmal, poor level design, poor characterization, poor everything. Next up is Final Fantasy 15 Episode Ignis. I have not played Final Fantasy 15. I have not played any of the preceding DLCs, so I don't have the greatest opinion. All I have to say is that Ignis can make a flashy light show with his elbows. Whoopee. You know, it's not like I'm not excited to play another RPG, but a lot of people say that 15 did not live up to the hype, which is understandable because that game was in development for like 13 years, so that's a lot to live up to. I'm pretty sure Final Fantasy fans will like it who liked 15 at least, but for me personally, I don't know. I might pick the game up at discount at best. Next we have Blood and Truth. That looked kind of cool. It reminded me of a first-person VR GoldenEye experience, but it had fucking crazy inaccurate movement. Probably this is the only VR shooter that I saw that looked interesting. Riggs didn't do it for me, but this game looks like something unique that they're doing with the over-the-top craziness. The guy catching the sign at the end. The hands and the legs just look so crazy inaccurate, and I guess that's because they have to work with the VR movement going all over the place, so it just looks kind of weird. But at the same time, I'm pretty sure a lot of people have something to look forward to picking up this game. Personally, will I buy a VR headset for this? Probably not. So next up we have Detroit Become Abusive Father, Detroit Become America, Detroit Become Human. Honestly, at this point, I feel as though they are showing way too much of Detroit Become Human. I don't get where the hype stems from. David Cage himself is a pretentious jackass, so I don't get why people are hyped about this title. It seems like an overglorified rental at best. Heavy Rain is the only David Cage game I bothered to pick up, and even then there was some studio interference with Sony. They cut stuff out of the game. The game had bad acting. So yeah, Heavy Rain was not perfect itself, and I assume the same is gonna happen here. David Cage games are just QTE, the movie, the game, and that's pretty much the solid truth. God of War had a brief snippet of gameplay, very brief actually, showing a stone lava golem figure and Kratos and his son trying not to alert it. It showed off some new moves like an enemy throw, which looked pretty badass, so that might be used to knock people off balance. But yeah, not a lot of God of War as I expected. It was weird. Hopefully they show off more of the game at PlayStation Experience, which I assume that's what they're going to do over Paris Games Week. But for what they showed, I did enjoy it. Moving on, they had a Monster Hunter World trailer, and they showed off the biggest thing at the end, which was the Monster Hunter X Horizon Zero Dawn skin. You can now play as Aloy to some extent in the new Monster Hunter World game. That looks pretty dope. Next we have Spider-Man for PS4. Here we go. This game looks like it's going to rock my fucking socks. As a fan of comics, as a fan of Spider-Man, as a fan of Insomniac in general, I was thoroughly impressed by this trailer yet again. Unfortunately, they did not show a solid release date. It's still slated to come out sometime next year, which is better than nothing, but I guess we'll move on to the details. So it showed us more of a duality between Spider-Man and Peter Parker, mostly focusing on Peter Parker. As you are well aware, Peter Parker lives dual lives, which Insomniac mentioned, and it will be explored in the story as you play with Spidey and Peter Parker. You will alternate between Peter and the man with the mask. Mary Jane looked playable as well. Maybe it looked like she had a small stealth segment sneaking up on a goon, so maybe you can temporarily play as her. I'm glad they're noticing that they want to make MJ a little different, if so that's pretty badass to have her get in on the action instead of being a damsel in distress. They showed a lot more story exposition. We had a lot more interaction between other characters, namely Aunt May and Martin Lee, pre-Mr. Negative. If you aren't well aware of Martin Lee's origins, then I believe he is a Chinese immigrant. He is also the alter ego, Mr. Negative. That's the villain in the first act, I believe. He runs a volunteer soup kitchen known as Feast, and he's very acquainted with Peter Parker and Aunt May, and it's likely that Aunt May will get caught up considering the fact that she volunteers at this soup kitchen as well. There probably will be a morality discussion as well later on in the story, because I'm sure everyone's going to wonder why a philanthropist like Martin Lee would commit all these misdeeds as Mr. Negative. Shocker was shown at the end of the trailer, which is pretty cool. It sets up that there's Kingpin, Shocker, and Martin Lee, Mr. Negative, so there's a lot more going on behind the scenes. Insomniac did say this was their biggest superhero game to date, the biggest possible Spider-Man to date in terms of villains, so there's going to be a lot going on behind the scenes, which I cannot thoroughly wait for. Alright, on to the main attraction, The Last of Us Part 2. It dropped with a new trailer for Paris Games Week. I think it was reminiscent of the whole poster they had for The Last of Us with the person holding a hammer over a campfire. Now some details have surfaced about this trailer, and I'm going to bring up my own theories and speculations about it. It's kind of long, so bear with me, but one thing I will say, for the people complaining that The Last of Us Part 2 was too dark, was too bleak in nature for a trailer, fuck off. Because The Last of Us Part 1 was also violent. It's a very violent game. You know, for a game that has rated M for mature on the box and contains intense violence and blood and gore, I figured you would get the memo. People like Polygon, the worst fucking site ever, the fucking site that cannot play a video game to save their life, saying Last of Us was way too violent. Get the memo, play the first game, stop being stupid, stop being oblivious. Thank you very much. Now, on to the trailer at hand. Definitely, it looks like The Last of Us Part 2 is playing up on some Godfather 2 elements. If you've never seen The Godfather Part 2 beforehand, then I wholly recommend it if you have not. Anyway, the story tends to jump in different sections of time between Don Corleone's upbringing and back to the present yet again with Michael Corleone as the new Don. The reason I brought this up is because The Last of Us Part 2 for Paris Games Week focuses on characters completely unrelated to Joel and Ellie. You see a woman possibly getting tortured for being pregnant, and in a post-apocalyptic world, that's just one more mouth to feed for a community. I don't know if this means that the Fireflies used to be cultists before Marlene took over. It could be very possible. What they're doing in a scene in the trailer where they force a Chinese woman to the ground, they take a hammer to her left arm and they say clip her wings. She might be a betrayer of the Fireflies, and maybe this is how they used to carry things out with people who stabbed them in the back. Maybe this Chinese lady is trying to help out Ellie's mom prior to them coming in the woods. So I'm just guesstimating here. I'm just assuming maybe this group wants this young lady dead, and what ensues is a cult member is brutally murdered by an arrow-wielding boy, and then his partner follows suit right to the grave. And then eventually this lady that's supposedly Ellie's mom, she gets this woman in a headlock, and the Chinese lady takes a hammer right to her skull. Some very gruesome stuff here, and I really liked the tone of it. It looks very violent, it looks very mysterious, but there were some problems that I had with it. But going back to The Godfather Part 2, I strongly speculate that The Last of Us Part 2 will be jumping in between time periods, with the revenge arc being the current arc of Joel and Ellie, and whatever happened to Ellie having this beef with the Fireflies happening in the present, while we go to the past and deal with whatever happens with Ellie's mom. I'm going to assume this is Ellie's mother, Anna, played by Laura Bailey, if it's not evident enough with this 4-letter Unicode being blurred out on Twitter by the official Naughty Dog account. I will say Ellie's mother is a 4-letter name here, so it's very possible. If you don't believe me, I'll bring up the evidence in post in this video so you can see right here on screen for yourself. Anyway, there's been some people who brought up the theory on GameFAQs that the cultists might have been the reason why Ellie is immune to the fungal parasite. Maybe they conducted some viral experiment gone wrong with Anna and they're trying to correct their mistake. That's a nice theory regardless, but the trailer was a little bit of a bait and switch. I had no idea what was happening, so confusion kicked in. This trailer threw me off the rails just a little bit. Still looking forward to The Last of Us Part 2. Just wish we would have seen more gameplay in the mix, but of course, that's just a pipe dream. This game is still in early development. And I guess to add on here, a problem that I was confused with and I thought was weird is Ellie's mom is so fucking swole. Like, supposedly Anna is just a nurse, so she must have been in the bodybuilding camp with Nadine Ross. God damn, she's fucking swole as shit. I know people are angry that there seems to be no Joel and Ellie as well, but think rationally. This will be a sequel and a prequel all tied up into one pretty bow. That's my thoughts about Paris Games Week. I would say the conference was just a little bit slightly above average, and that's not saying much. They really struggled to maintain my interest in the show, only with a few games here or there, like the Ghost of Sushi game and The Last of Us Part 2, and some other lingering announcements that they had that I think could have been interesting. Spider-Man was also cool. God of War, it was brief, but it was also cool. But then some of the stuff we either already seen before, especially stuff like Detroit and Shadow of the Colossus. We've seen that game time and time again. Same with Monster Hunter World. It's time to put new games on this presentation panel if you can manage it. And I think what's really boring about some of these PlayStation conferences is that the sizzle reels of VR and the sizzle reels of indie games still keep happening. They are still prevalent, and I gotta give this conference a 6.5 out of 10. Not really the greatest Paris Games Week, but then again, who knows what could be in store for the next one. All I know is that the announcements, while they were cool, they could have had a lot more to the table here, and as a presentation, it just fails to keep my interest. Until then, this is Renegade Operative signing off. I hope you guys enjoyed my review of Paris Games Week, and I will see you guys next time. Once again, click all the social media in the description below. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, wherever the fuck, and I will be there. I will see you guys next time. Later.